I'm going to turn Sammy Ray off, and we'll welcome you back, Sammy, at the end. That's the person who's singing. All right, so we are talking today about how to make a go-to-market methodology stick at scale. This is a real conversation. I am here with Ian Westbrook. Let me just share. Ian Westbrook is with DocuSign and has been at places like Oracle and Microsoft and Responsys. So a lot of experience getting things to roll out at scale and stick. Probably good and bad, Ian, would you say?
A healthy dose of both.
Yeah.
I would say a healthy dose of both. Yeah.
So some of those battle scars are what are going to help us today. Let me just spotlight this. Oh, you know what? Let me do this differently.
Hi, Zach. I see some people chiming in via the
Amazing.
chat.
Thank you. Okay. Are you seeing that the way we should, Sari?
We're not seeing your lovely face.
Oh, okay. Well, I can do that. How's that?
Excellent.
Everything good? Okay, cool. So, so Ian and I are going to facilitate a conversation. We do have some points of view based on, like I said, based on battle scars, some victories, some defeats, and we welcome you to weigh in with your own experience to keep this moving. Rolling out a methodology is difficult. It is no joke. It's a human effort, and it requires commitment. And commitment is a function of momentum. So you think about like pedaling up a hill. We've got Tour de France going on right now. You think about pedaling up a hill. I need momentum. I need momentum as myself. I need momentum as my team. And I need momentum over the course of the entire multi-day event. And when I start to lose momentum, I start to lose commitment. If I'm able to maintain commitment, maintain momentum, that's a way of maintaining commitment. Thinking about an effort like this in that lens makes it different than just a project. So we want to think about that. Like, where are we getting the commitment from humans who have to now do something differently than what they used to do? And one of those sources of commitment is momentum. So we're going to be managing that carefully. This is only going to work to the extent that people believe. And in order to kind of feed that belief and feed that commitment, feed that momentum, we can't ask people to do everything all at once. That's going to be a request for them to fail. And failure is not a feeder of momentum or commitment or belief. So we got to set people up, humans, we got to set them up to succeed. That's just a backdrop for our conversation today. A couple of definitions. And there's a white paper that goes along with this. We'll distribute that along with the slides after this conversation. But a GTM methodology is what we're talking about today. That is kind of the set of turn-by-turn directions and definitions of how a GTM team member behaves. What is the contextual awareness? What are the skills? What is the process? Basically, what am I executing as a member of a GTM team? And then a GTM operating model. That is what sits in the background. That's the parameters of the GTM system. That's the definition of the process, the definition of the stages, the data model that underpins it. How are we going to measure it? Where are we going to see that measurement? So if I've got people executing against a methodology, I'm going to want to see that show up in my operating model so that I can, declare success. I can declare it in not just a qualitative, but also a quantitative way. And I can also, measure it, monitor it. Anything you would add to that, Ian?
I think as we go through the conversation here today, Dave, that the interplay between the methodology and the operating model and how one can borrow from the other in order to keep that momentum, I think that's the key that you were touching on here just a minute ago. at least from the experiences that I've seen or that I've been either directly a consumer of or a driver of, it's that interplay between both of them that ultimately makes them successful. One without the other, I think there are varying degrees of adoption. I'm sure many on this call have their own experiences.
Let's get into that. In the chat, how many have had a positive experience with a GTM methodology? Whether you were on the receiving end, you're on the implementation end, doesn't matter. And a positive experience with GTM methodology is just say, me in the chat, and let's see how many positive experiences we've had. Actually, let's do this because I don't see anything coming up yet. You can put the word positive or you can put the word negative. If you've had no experience with a GTM methodology, then you can stay silent. Positive experiences out there, negative experiences out there.
This is an interesting question because I guess it depends on what everyone's definition of positive is.
Yeah. All right, we've got both positive and negative, mostly both positive and negative. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. What about a GTM operating model? Does anyone have experience with a GTM operating model? Just put a yes in the chat if you've had experience with a GTM operating model. Okay, less experience with a GTM operating model. All right, so we're going to be talking about both to Ian's point, the GTM methodology and the operating model, but we're leaning mostly into the GTM methodology today. So we are assuming that somewhere in your system you have a definition of process, you have a definition of stages, and you have a way to measure activities and outcomes, and that sits underneath this human piece, which is the methodology, where I'm training and teaching and reinforcing a set of behaviors that we want humans to do. We're assuming the operating model exists somewhere, and we're talking about the GTM methodology. That's how today is set up. If we want to do a future session on an operating model, that would be great. All right, so we've defined some meta stages of a methodology rollout. This is kind of how today's conversation is structured: design, activate, and operate. And we believe that if we're going to succeed, we're going to succeed by design, especially at scale. Succeeding by accident is very hard to do at scale. You can do it, in a startup, but at scale, it's very hard to succeed by accident. Activation and operation is where kind of these human elements come into play, and where we're managing commitment and momentum and belief. So let's click into design. Within design, we want to start with leadership alignment. Now, leadership alignment might be the most important step of all. This is a do not pass go, do not collect 200 moment. Like, if you're not working on what leadership cares about, what are you even doing? I phrased that the way one of my kids would phrase it. If you're not working on what leadership cares about, what are you even doing? Like, seriously, we're just going to chug along on what we care about, leadership doesn't care about, and we're going to get that's going to come together at some point in the future? It's not. Like, it's not. We got to understand what leadership is about today. Now, we can influence what leadership cares about today. That's cool. And we can converge, but we're not going to fight this battle in the execution. We're going to be aligned as we go into this. And no matter how lovely our design is, if we're the ones that care about it, we can't design our way to greatness, because we need leaders to help humans have the commitment to do what they're going to do. So we can greatest slides, the greatest process diagrams, the greatest infrastructure, the greatest operating model. And if leaders don't care about it, they don't know about it, they don't care about it, they don't support it, we're going to fail. So what we really need to do is work with leaders as we go into an effort like this and figure out, how does our leadership describe the current situation? Like, what are the words that they use? That matters, because the words that they use that they choose to describe it are probably the things they care about. And we're probably going to need to align to that. How would they describe their pain? What's their view on potential impact? What critical event are they tracking? And how are they going to make decisions about this effort? If we can get alignment on all of this stuff up front, boy, do we have a better chance of succeeding. And rather have those conversations now, even if they feel like, mini conflicts, than the giant conflict of we did a ton of work, we built a whole program, we tried to roll it out, and it fell flat because it had no support. That's a way harder conversation. It's 9 months later and lots of blood, sweat, and tears later, so I can delay it, I can postpone it, but I can't avoid it. That's a way harder conversation than having some conversations right now to get leadership aligned and to figure out kind of how we can be operating on something that we both care about. Any comments or elaborations on that?
Yeah, Dave, maybe I'll share an observation. We've got a diverse audience here, so I'd be curious on some of the observations to the audience, and that is, one of the challenges is found within that word of scale. That as you go to an organization, I know we'll touch on this a little bit as part of this conversation, but as you go to larger and larger sizes of scale, that means that there are more individuals who fall under that leadership header, right? And so now you've got more leaders, and now you're, at least in my observation, having to spend some amount of time aligning those leaders around those elements. So that leadership alignment becomes more complex because you have more people at the table who are weighing in. And, I think more recently, an observation has been that, those leaders who come from a background where they have seen methodology be very successful, where they've been at a company where it's either been integrated or they've seen a lot of financial success or whatever it might be. They may have even been earlier in their career in a situation where they were in an environment where that was taking place. That those individuals usually represent a different cohort and different needs around the alignment for methodology than those leaders who may have come from organizations or from backgrounds where that script hasn't been laid out, or that scenario hasn't been the case. As it's been interesting, I think, as organizations scale, and you have multiple constituents of leaders at a table, they're going to fit into those different buckets. They've either seen it, they already know that there's a lot of success to be had, or they may be in line with it, and they may certainly be supportive of it, but they may not be as ingrained in terms of having their own personal success tied to it or having an experience. And I think what that can lead to is different strategies around, well, how do we build that alignment across those multiple leaders, and which buckets do they fit in? Because that's going to determine the bar in which we need to actually engage with those leaders. If they haven't seen that movie, if they haven't read that book, we've got more work to do, up front in gaining that alignment in order to bring them along so that we can ultimately have the success that we need to have down the line. Again, there's a fairly diverse group here in the workshop, so I'm sure there's a lot of different perspectives on this, but I think, yeah, in summary, an observation is the more leaders that are at the table that necessitate that alignment, they can be broken out into two different groups, those who have seen it and are probably going to have a natural bent towards adopting it, and then those who haven't, that might be supportive but are going to represent a higher bar in terms of what's needed to bring them along and
What's
get
the
that
role,
alignment.
Ian? So let's say I have both. I have a mix of both, like you're saying. I've got some leaders who've had a positive experience with the go-to-market methodology. I have some who have a mixed experience, like we kind of saw in our audience poll. Maybe I have some who have no experience. They're not even sure what the value of a methodology is. What's the role of top-down sponsorship in that environment?
I think that's a great question. I don't know if the answer I'm going to give is very satisfying, Dave,
Okay.
because I think what I've witnessed is that it varies. And when I say it varies, is that I've seen leaders that are very, very top-down oriented to, and actually those leaders who are very tops down about that alignment typically have been part of the bucket that have seen it be very successful. I've
Sure.
seen other leaders that have really deferred to their wider leadership group in the field as to a more consensus-based orientation around some of that decision making. And in those situations, it is more complex, and there is a lot more work that's needed around that alignment. I've seen both in different variations, but I wouldn't say that. At least in my experience, it hasn't always been, hey, there's alignment from a tops down perspective.
That latter scenario is going to be tough. No, hey, every leader run the way that she wants to. Now I got to go convince leaders one at a time. That's going to be a tough consensus building. Okay, so,
Yep.
but leadership alignment is super important. And what we know is that we're going to invest a lot of time and energy. We're going to invest attention, time, design hundreds or thousands of hours. We're going to put a lot of individual contributors and frontline managers through workshops and classroom and role play. So, I think the point here is if we don't feel like we have the support we need from the people in the field who are going to be holding reps accountable, have the courage to pump the brakes. Take some time and work on the stuff that Ian's talking about, building that alignment until we, and as soon as we're confident in that, now we have a shot. It's still hard. Like we're still pedaling uphill. We still have to manage momentum. But without leadership support, we're not even setting ourselves up to succeed at all. Now, one of the things that we're going to want to do with leadership is we want to align on, well, what does success look like? Like, hey, why are we doing this? And what does it look like? And there are two metrics that we believe that we should be tracking. One, we will call an impact metric. So that might be like a growth rate, a total bookings number, maybe even a conversion rate or a close rate. Those are things that I probably can see today in my systems. They're things that we're probably going over in QBRs right now. Quota attainment might be one of those. On this slide, we're talking about discounting as an impact metric. But what leads to that impact metric? Because it may be hard to see a growth rate, especially if I have a sales cycle that's 6 months long. I may not see a growth rate improve or a close rate improve or a bookings number improve for 12 months. Because I gotta get the system adjusted. I gotta play it all the way through. I gotta let a whole sales cycle and a bunch of sales cycles play through, and then I'm gonna start to see the impact metrics move. Well, is there any way I can declare victory earlier? Yeah, our contention is yes, because we know what correlates with a higher close rate or a higher bookings number or a lower discount rate. Well, what are those things? In the case of discounting, it's literally the word discount. Like, when does the word discount come up? What's its frequency in call 1, in call 2, and call 3? Can I measure that? If I'm recording calls, I can. If I'm using a system like Gong, I can set a tracker and I can know whether the word discount comes up as early as discovery. And if the word discount comes up, then I know my reps are leading with it, and that actually correlates with a higher discount rate. So I can actually measure that, and I can see those leading indicators improve based on the training. And if those leading indicators improve, I can declare victory on that, knowing that the correlate impact metric is probably going to move too. It's just to wait 6 to 12 months to start to see that moving. Now, discount rate may actually move a little faster than that, but some of these things like growth rate and total bookings are going to take some time. So if I can get the leadership to decide what are we working on, what are the impact metrics, and what are the leading indicators, now I have a way to declare victory. Because as soon as I start seeing those things move, the things that we decided in a conference room matter, I have a way to declare victory. Now, that being said, here's the tough part. Baselining. So usually after you get your leadership team to agree, this is the impact metric I care about, and yes, those are probably the leading indicators that are going to lead to it. And then I start showing them a trailing 90-day version of that. They'll say, oh, no, there's no way. So you're telling me that our leading indicator metric is customer meetings per week, and my average rep has 1.6 customer meetings per week, there's no way. They're having at least 15 meetings per week. I promise you. It's been that way since I started. And then you go back into the records and you say, well, it's 1.6 meetings per week. And now we have a conversation. But if you skip that conversation, then when you try to declare victory 9 days from now and say, good news, we're at 11 meetings per week, they're going to say, that's not good news. We used to do 15 meetings per week. But since you didn't agree on what the actual baseline was for the leading indicator, you actually took all the wind out of your sails for that victory. So baselining is as much a measurement exercise as it is a expectation setting and almost a negotiation. And I hate to say it that way because we're not, on opposite sides of the table, but a lot of our leaders haven't been in the numbers. They haven't been tracking numerically. They have a gut feel because they've been alongside their reps, but they don't know actually what the baseline is. So part of leadership alignment is figuring out what matters and figuring out what the baseline is on those metrics so that when we come back with victory in hand, they'll recognize it as victory. Anything you want to add there, Ian?
I would completely agree with that, Dave. And I it's interesting. There's always at least in my experience, there's always a lot of pressure to do things quickly, because usually when you're at the point in which, hey, a methodology is needed, it needs to, we need to execute on it. There's usually a lot of pressure to do it as quickly as possible. I think one of the things that, a key learning that has gone both, has created challenges, at least in my experience in the past, as well as opportunity, is can we afford the time? Can we elbow out the time to make sure that we are actually doing appropriate baselining? And I think that speaks to a lot of good that can come out of that, Dave, that you articulated. If that's not the case, then how quickly can we assess where we want to snap the line in a pre and post world? Meaning, if we're doing something, if we're going to be launching a training, if we're going to be enabling a cohort, whatever that might be, can we snap a line that looks pre that event to start to understand that baseline so that we can start to understand that story? And then really the third piece that comes to mind in your comments here is from a leading indicator perspective, having that correlation. And I've been part of circumstances where I'll use an example where multi-threading, for instance, we knew that was a leading indicator in terms of the ability of our sellers to generate opportunities. And so we knew that we were going to have to be understanding that baseline of, well, how effective are we at multi-threading today? We know that that's going to have a direct correlation with the number of opportunities that those sellers are ultimately generating in the business. And we can use elements like that, elements from Spiced as they actually get into the deal that will tell us, okay, well, here's the impact that we're going to expect to see in the time horizons that we would expect to see them. So, just as much on the impact piece, getting that alignment there, but then also getting alignment on, well, those leading indicators represent the big pieces of the behavioral change. And so there's a lot of alignment that's necessary in terms of what those leading indicators are as well.
So guys, if you get a chance to connect with Ian afterwards, I highly recommend it. In terms of rolling out a methodology at scale, I don't know anyone who's got more data on how leading indicators correlate with impact than Ian. It is statistically and significant and definitive when you pick the right leading indicator that correlates with the right impact metric. You can actually see that and then take that victory and then use that for momentum and belief going forward. I see Ian nodding because I know he's lived it. It's a hard fought victory and Ian has done the work.
Well, it speaks to the challenge that I'm sure everybody on here that has tried to introduce a methodology has seen, and that is you'll have pockets of strong adoption and you'll have pockets that it's really working for. But what that necessitates is that you need to address where are the pockets where the adoption is lower. And in order to have the narrative, in order to have the ammunition, if you will, in order to have substantive conversations with why you need to readdress the momentum with those teams that may be lower adopters, yeah, being very crisp around the narrative around what those leading indicators are and the correlation is very much key to those discussions, especially as you start to ascend the different levels of executive sponsorship.
So coming back to these three design principles: leadership alignment, impact metrics, and leading indicators, and baselining. What about this sounds hard? Be honest. Put something in the chat. What about this sounds hard, or what about this have you experienced to be hard? Okay, leadership alignment, difficult. Has nothing to do with egos, I'm sure. Baselining can be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I like Benjamin's comment here too. The WIFM. Yeah, what's in it for the seller? Yeah.
Difficult to accurately define and source data points. Oh my goodness. And the more scale you have, the harder that is. Like where does that leading indicator even live? Like, is it in outreach? Is it in Gong? Is it in Salesforce? Is it in HubSpot? Is it in Marketo? Is it in my financial systems? Like, where am I going to get that? Getting leaders to leave biases at the door. It's really hard to be honest, with, because if you're a field leader, you know better than any of us how much belief and momentum matter and how much this is a human business. So, I'm not going to motivate people with failure. I'm going to motivate people with success. So if I have a bias around my team is successful, therefore nothing they do stinks, that's going to be tough. And we don't want to say the word stinks, but we do want to be honest about, where we've been and where we want to get to. So yeah, those biases can be tough, and there's +2s on that. Excellent.
The other thing that comes to mind, Dave, just in relation to one of the comments around the sources of data, is that as you scale, the sources of data also change. Usually it's not a uniform footprint of technology across a large organization, right? You'll have different segments that have different access to different tools and different data that's being generated by those different segments, right? Your enterprise AEs, might be using a slightly different sales tech stack than your high velocity S&B sellers. Again, we're talking about organizations that are at large scale.
Yeah.
That presents another complexity there of, well, so we have some data sources that are coming in from some groups and maybe not from other groups. And how do you actually stitch that together? One of the areas that we have found successful is trying to be rigorous about how basic we can make it. Which sometimes that is the complexity. It's trying to really distill things down into its most simplest forms. I would assume that I don't want to be too presumptuous, but most of this audience being somewhat familiar with winning by design and the spiced framework, an example of that would be instrumenting spice just as open text fields into opportunities within your CRM system. Now, what that necessitates is a behavioral change at scale for all of your sellers to be entering in situation, pain, impact, critical event, decision process, et cetera. But what that also does is that regardless of the tech stack that you might have, assuming that everybody has a CRM, that it allows you to then start to use that very basic level of information as your leading indicators and correlation. Meaning, great, how many of my sellers, after we've gone through this methodology rollout, are actually filling out all 5 of those fields, or depending on how you instrumented, all 6 of those fields on all of their closed won opportunities? Well, a certain percentage will have filled it all out. Another percentage will only have filled out certain elements of it, et cetera. And you can start to build on using those very basic elements to give you a lot of rich data around the leading indicators of what is working, what is not, where you have strong adoption, where you have weak adoption. And it levels the playing field in terms of the level of sophistication or the types of tools that you might have access to, or that different groups have access to, et cetera. So just wanted to share a very simple example.
I love that.
That works.
It's sort of like, let's not make perfect be the enemy of the good. What could we get alignment around? what could we put into place, and then what information could we get back from that. It still follows this framework of leading indicator and impact metric, still follows this framework of baselining, but it's not trying to do everything all at once. It's trying to do something that I know I can succeed at. Love that. I had a mentor who used to say, I don't know if you can see me up in the top right corner, you can fight a bull like this, or you can fight a bull like this. And we don't need to put perfect right at the center and say it's all or nothing. These are difficult, large projects. If we can break them down in any way, like the way that you just mentioned, Ian, I think that's a wonderful way to get a little bit of momentum.
Yep. And it's a low technological hurdle in order to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so there's design. If we do design well, and we've got alignment behind whatever level of design we've been able to get alignment behind, now we're set up to go into the next phase, which is going to be activate. And this thematically follows a similar thread to what Ian was just talking about. Can we break this problem down and so that it's not an all or nothing thing? And so we've got a concept of a speed team. We've got a concept of using that initial success to create a pull from the organization. And then we've got a concept of phased rollouts. So let's talk through what that would look like. So let's say that we were able to break the problem down, as Ian said, into like, we're going to tackle one thing and we're going to do it very simply, implement it very simply. All right, great. So now do I just train everybody on it? All 1,000 sellers, all 600 sellers, all 200 sellers, whatever my number is, and expect them to change? It's going to be fraught. I promise you that's going to be fraught, because to Ian's point earlier, we got different leaders out there with different backgrounds and different levels of commitment. But what if I could find one leader who actually has buy-in to this and actually has courage and is actually willing to lead her team of 5 to 10 people into the unknown and come back with victory? What if I could find one team to do that? What would that mean for me? So we call that a speed team. And we select a speed team for courage. We want a good leader and we want courageous reps, because we know we're sending them into something that is new territory. So they've got to be comfortable with dealing with new things, but they also have to be determined enough that they're going to come back with victory no matter what. We're also going to resource this team. So we're going to put experts next to them. Like if a future rep is going to sit in a training cohort with 25 people, this rep is going to be in a cohort with only her 5 closest colleagues. If a future rep is going to get help once a week, this cohort's going to get help every day. Why? Because it's new, and we know we have to over-resource it. Is that cheating? Yes. Do we care? No. Like, we're cheating. We're trying to help this team succeed. We're trying to help this leader have an up and to the right story that she can now represent. We're trying to help these reps have a good experience with this new methodology. We're trying to get that WIFM that was talked about in the chat to actually materialize. Like, we want reps to step forward and say, you know what, I used to do this and then I switched to this and now my results are that. That's an amazing testimonial, and we can manufacture it out of a small team. It's very hard to get it to happen at scale, especially if you roll everyone out at once and skepticism prevails. But you can make it happen in a small team just by sheer force of will if you pick the right team. So now what we want this team to do is not only succeed, but then seed, S-E-E-D, that success into the rest of the organization. So we're going to want that up and to the right story to be published. We're going to want those reps to be on stage with the trainers. We're going to want that manager to be representing to her peers what it felt like to start to see the wins that come from implementing a methodology carefully and deliberately. So that's what we call pull marketing. You can imagine what the opposite is: push marketing. hey, everybody, we got a brand new methodology. Come sit in the classroom, open wide, swallow hard. It's not going to hurt too much. That rarely works. That's not going to work. But pull marketing is, wait, what are those guys doing over there again? Like, how did they just bump their numbers by 30%? Like, why did they get that and I didn't get that? Like, when am I going to get that? That's almost like a pull from the organization because they're almost jealous of the results that the speed team were able to achieve. Now, they may not have volunteered to be on a speed because that's a dangerous mission, but once the speed team comes back with victory, now all of a sudden they want it. So, yes, we're cheating a little bit, but it's a classic kind of move to get success to beget more success.
Dave, Jamie Hicks had a good question here in the chat.
Yeah.
She asks, how long does it normally take to go from speed team to pull marketing?
All right. So we're gonna thank you, Jamie. That's a great question. And to point earlier, everyone's impatient, right? Like we're too impatient to baseline, we're too impatient to design, we're too impatient to pilot or speed team. Like we just got to get out there, right? So we got to cheat that a little bit too. So in my experience, we're going to actually launch the speed team even before some of that other stuff is done. Well, gosh, that sounds like the opposite of cheating. Now I'm actually setting them up to fail. No, because we're going to compensate for that. We basically know what it needs to look like. And we also are confident that our facilitators are going to be able to help them adjust in real time. So we're on daily iterations with this speed team. So we're actually comfortable launching them into the unknown even before the playbook is published, quote unquote, or the whole system is designed, quote unquote. So we're going to overlap it a little bit, Jamie. And then it really depends on the leading indicators that you pick. So if I think that I can get leading indicators to move within days or weeks, not months or quarters, then really it's just a matter of how long does it take for my speed team to adopt this new way of operating, and then it's going to take days or weeks to see their leading indicators move. So now I might be 4 weeks out from being able to declare initial victory out of a speed team. That's probably on the fast side. But if I overlap 2 of those weeks with finishing up my designs, then I only really feel a 2 week delay before I can start using some of those stories in my broader rollout.
So you're saying also the speed team is also getting or providing real-time feedback in the creation or adoption
Yes.
of the model going forward?
Yes, absolutely. So
So
if
it
there
sounds
are,
like it's almost very critical to pick the right speed team first. Or you got to get the right team.
that is my experience. And who is that speaking?
It's Jamie.
Oh, Jamie, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Jamie.
I was going to make a comment there, Dave. I don't want to interrupt you here.
No, go.
Jamie, I think that's the perfect question. And sort of back to a topic that we were discussing here just a few minutes ago, and that is, at least at scale, where if you have a situation where there are a multitude of sales leaders, and so you've got a lot of different options in terms of where you're trying to pick and decide who's going to be that speed team. I'd be curious on your experience, Jamie. My experience has been that in being able to bucket those who have done it and who are probably chasing after another scenario of success with methodology versus those who may be supportive but have not actually had that experience, that picking from that bucket, or at least doing that identification up front so you know how you're going to get your leadership alignment, also produces a pool of individuals or leaders to pick from that, again, have seen the movie, have read the book, and that those represent a really ripe ground to pick the speed team from, because they would have already gone through some of this in a previous life in one form or another, and that those ultimately are also going to be the best people who are helping to get that pull, meaning they're going to be the ones who are going to be sort of the internal spokespeople and a lot easier to work with because they've already seen it. They've already done it to some extent.
Agree. Now, do you also, when you look at creating the speed team, is it one team with one manager and his or her reps, or would it be a manager and reps from multiple teams? Were you trying to find the best of the best?
Former. Nope, it's the former.
Okay.
We can only kind of deal with one motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay, cool.
So you're going to make compromises. I mean, I'm sure that's where you're going, Jamie. You're going to make compromises because not all the reps live on a single team. All the best reps live on a single team.
Right.
But if we have a good manager and a decent set of reps who have decent track record, and to Ian's point, have some buy-in from top down. And then the one other thing I would say, are going to command respect on the other side. You know, if you pick a speed team that is in the fat Manhattan territory that always gets all the best leads anyway, and has the manager that everyone knows has been on top of the leaderboards forever, and then they come back saying, "Hey, look at us! Like we just succeeded for the GT," and everyone goes, "Yeah, whatever. You're Manhattan. Like I'm
Yeah.
in Manhattan, Kansas. You're in Manhattan, New York. Like, good for you." Like that's not going to work. So we're making a bunch of compromises and we're picking carefully. I think that was well said, Jamie.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
One
Cool.
other thing I was going to mention, Dave, and you know, I don't want to deviate too much from methodology. A lot of what my team focuses on is both methodology and process. Is that you know, one observation that we've had, and we've got a fair amount of data, is that anytime that we build something for sellers, if we build something that is of quality, we're getting seller feedback, we're including them in the design that or the rollout, et cetera, that the adoption of it usually falls within one of three buckets. If all we did was just a little bit of training and a playbook, we're probably going to see a 10 to 20% adoption, just because those are going to be the best sellers in the organization that naturally gravitate towards, hey, here's this new thing. It's built with quality. Great. I'll use it. If we integrate it into our systems, meaning we've got a strong integration amongst our sales tech stack and we have good design, usually that's the 35 to 40% range. And then the third bucket is, of course, that top-down enforcement. If we have leaders that are actually enforcing it top-down, that's where we start to really get into the 75% plus adoption. And the reason why I share that in this forum is that, you know, again, through choosing the right speed team, and I think to what you're discussing here, Dave, of getting that pull, is that you're choosing a team that that is going to have a leader that is already going to be at that level of getting that tops down enforcement within their team. And so you're going to be talking about that 75% adoption with that team, which gives you just so much more rich information in order to actually share out, in order to actually iterate on, to be a lot more successful at scale. It's kind of a cheat code. You're jumping over bucket 1 and 2 to automatically get to bucket 3, which is that tops down enforcement.
You're such a cheater, Ian.
I'll take all the cheat codes I can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, that gets us kind of our next challenge. You know, we're doing this at scale, and to Ian's point, like, I mean, there are, depending on the scale of your company, there can be geographies, there could be team structure, different motions, different product lines, different businesses. So like, you know, how are we going to get change to take across the entire organization at once? Even one speed team may not be enough for everyone. You know, good luck getting France to listen. If there's anyone from France, I'm sorry. You know, France is going to do it their own way no matter what. Okay, so like, how do I roll out in France? How do I roll out in channels? How do I roll out in renewals versus new acquisition versus expansion? So we got to be really conscious of that. And you know, how do we, you know, and this is the big challenge. How am I comprehensive while not being overwhelming? And how do I take measurable credit for success along the way? It is a big challenge. Like for everyone here that's in an enablement role, this is probably the thing that keeps us up at night. Probably the thing that that makes us want to just go put our head in the hole and work on slides or spreadsheets instead of dealing with humans. But it's not going to work. Like the slides and spreadsheets are not going to solve the problem. We actually have to solve this problem. So how are we going to do it? By the way, there's no panacea here. Like it's all messy. But the principle that Ian brought up earlier, breaking this down, making it simple, you know, breaking it into its component parts, can also apply to a phased rollout approach. So if you think about that speed team being the front end of 1 or 2 skill upgrades across a single motion, well, what would I do next? Maybe it's skill number 3 and 4 across that same motion, and then skill number 5 and 6 across that same motion. Soon, I've got that team, let's say that's the acquisition team, used to, and Kanji does this explicitly, like every month they pick something new and they work with their team on what that's going to look like in practice. And then next month they pick the next thing, and next month they pick the next thing. Clary does a similar thing. So there are ways to break this down. Now, it means changing my culture, not just having a one and done enable like training exercise, check, everybody's certified. Now I can finally, I got my certification in the rearview mirror. Now I can, get on to doing business. No, this is a changing culture. This actually encourages managers to show up as coaches. So you can imagine if I'm Kanji, if I'm Sonia at Kanji, need managers to reinforce that. Like in between those monthly sessions, I need managers now working on that skill, reviewing that skill, coaching, seat writing, and getting that to stick, declaring victory on it. And then here comes the next one. And then here comes the next one. So managers actually step into a really important role of coaching. And we start to understand that systematically working across our organization, we are learning, and then we are doing, and then we are achieving. So on any given set of skills with any given set of leading indicators, it actually might be that while I'm sitting in training, I'm not doing any work. It actually might be that learning to do it the new way is actually causing me to stumble a little bit. So it actually might be there's a period while I'm learning where, I'm not as productive, at least on that particular aspect of my job, as I used to be. But if I'm picking these carefully, I'm going to come out of it better. And if I start to stack these, because I'm rolling skills across my organization, they start to compound. I get better at discovery. I get better at discounting. I get better at trade. I get better at multi-threading. I get better at, all of these skills that go into my job. Well, gosh, I'm a better rep at that point. Like my organization is better. I'm a better learning organization. My managers are in the game on coaching. I know where the leading indicators are. I know where the impact metrics are. I actually can't wait for the next thing that I get to learn because I know it's going to help me be a better version of myself for this job or the next job. But it will be a culture shift in order to if I'm going to adopt this idea of continuous learning and phased rollout, it's going to be a culture shift.
Dave, I'll just add to that. Maybe my add to the phased rollout piece. I'm sure myself and others who are here in the workshop have probably faced a similar challenge that, trying to do too much at once, meaning trying to roll it out to everybody, everyone, all at once in a non-phased rollout has, a lot of challenges associated with it. And there's usually a lot of pressure to do it that way. But the consequence is that it's actually duplicative. You're dealing with a much more complex scenario if you're talking about thousands of people across multiple segments and across multiple selling motions. And there's going to be some natural skepticism as to whether or not the thing that's being rolled out in more of a vanilla format is going to work for enterprise versus SMB. There was a comment, I think maybe it was Sean or somebody who was talking about SMB and enterprise. And then also that complexity also adds just a tremendous amount of burden on the support organizations who are actually rolling it out. And that burden and that those two things don't equate to successful longevity. And so I think to your point, Dave, that phased rollout and picking your spot and being successful in that spot, both with the speed team and how you're going to phase that, becomes really critical for what is the long-term success of this thing. Because changing it up is not really an option to do that on a regular basis when it comes to methodology. You want to be in a position where you're making a decision and a commitment and an investment that ultimately is going to have a lot of longevity. And so I think your points, Dave, around phased rollouts and how you are selective about your speed teams are really key on both sides of the equation, not only for the rollout and the adoption of the field, but also for those that are supporting that rollout and that adoption to be successful and how they can execute on their end.
Amazing. So lucky to have you on this call, Ian. You'll get these slides later. Here's an example of someone else who uses, we call these impact sprints. You can call it whatever you want, phased rollout, skill-based learning culture, etc. So now we're on to operate. So we went design, we went activate. Activate is, this concept of a speed team or pilot team, concept of pull marketing, and a concept of phased rollouts. So now I'm in a mode of operating, and we previewed some of these concepts already, because where does it naturally lead to? It leads to some of these things. So ongoing measurement could look something like, sometimes call an impact office. So do we have a cockpit of GTM measurement? Do we know where the metrics are? Do we know which ones are the next area of focus? And can we, on a rolling basis, choose what the next skills are that we want to roll out? Not just based on, I haven't gotten to it yet, but based on which piece of this GTM engine do I want to work on next? Like, where do I want to see skills improve next? And what is that impact on my overall number? It may be, and those of you familiar with the bow tie, it may be on the acquisition side. It may be on the retention and expansion side. If I have limited enablement resources and I need to pick, let's pick based on where the highest impact is to my overall revenue machine. If I don't need to pick and I've got a culture of coaching already in place, maybe I can run a couple in parallel, because these humans are different than these humans. Quarterly reporting, key insights on performance. Based on those, I look at the results. I choose what the next thing is going to be. And then over a rolling 30, 60, 90-day window, I make my prioritization decisions about where do I aim my learning next. So that is what ongoing measurement could look like. I could prioritize those sprints. This is an example. My sales close rate is what I want to work on first. I slowly start inching that up. After I get a quarter worth of wind in my sails down here, then I work on discounting. I slowly start working that down. I get some wind in my sails. Then I start working on expansion rate. Is that making sense? I hope I'm making sense. These are feedback loops, basically. I'm watching the metrics. I'm watching what is laddering up to the overall results that I want, and I'm picking the next area that I want to dive into. I'm resolving that into a couple of key skills, and I'm going and enabling my team accordingly. So to create lasting change, we do have to measure. We do want to see where it shows up, how it shows up. We want to give ourselves credit. Back to this team, we want to give ourselves credit. Like, a stage win is an important win. Like, it's an important win. Helping my lead rider get up a hill, that's an important win. Like, these are important wins. We got to keep momentum going. But in order to do that, we got to measure. So we got to see it show up in the numbers. And our managers need wins too. Our managers need to be able to go to their QBRs and say, this is what I've been working on and here's what's improved. So we want to show managers things that they can measure other than just bookings. Things that they can take credit for upgrading their team that we know correlate with things like bookings. All right, we talked about a culture of coaching. We're running up against time, but this is all going to resolve into a culture of coaching: inspection, coaching, inspiration, and belief, more than just management. And in order to get this all to work, and I'm going to kind of give you the last word on this, Ian, as we wrap up, operationalizing this is a way to get it to, is a way to combat the forgetting curve. What would you share with us on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. A lot of times what we'll talk about is, what is the ecosystem? Is there a surround strategy within the ecosystem that, once the methodology is introduced, is it integrated into the systems? Is it integrated into the, even the language in terms of the key meetings that we use for performance management and to understand the metrics with leadership? Like, what does that ecosystem look like? When somebody opens up the CRM, is that language from the methodology represented in deal execution? When we open up, whether we're using tools in order to generate pipeline, okay, well, is that integrated with the methodology and the stages, et cetera? Is that same language there? When we have our, monthly stand-ups with sales leadership in order to assess the pipeline, in order to assess deal execution, are those elements of methodology very clear and very evident in those discussions? And so how do we create that ecosystem? And I mentioned, Dave, earlier, the 3 buckets of adoption, sort of the 10 to 20% range, then you get into the 20 to 30% range, and then you go up to the 75% range. In the absence of having just sort of dictatorship around tops down enforcement, you're going to have the ecosystem to even make it to that 40%. Because you're going to have a lot of things surrounding those sellers, surrounding those managers that can help to reinforce that methodology. That's been our experience, that in the absence of that, you're sliding back down into that 10 to 20% range in terms of that adoption.
Because humans.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing way to finish. So thank you so much for joining us. We do have a white paper that goes along with this. We will distribute that afterwards. It has all of these concepts in it. We'd love to stay in touch. We also host workshops regularly, like every week. You can see all of the recorded versions on this page. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can sign up for our research newsletter. We're super happy to have you join us today. And I'll invite Sammy Ray back in to send us out. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody.
Thinking to do before night time. Whoa, they come together, they say, whoa.